Hello and welcome to IdeaGen TV. Today we have with us a longtime supporter of IdeaGen, Dr. Sidhant Gupta, the Director of Product Incubation at Microsoft. Dr. Gupta, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much. It's always a privilege to be on Ideagen TV.
Yes, thank you for having us here. You're working in some very exciting things. And to jump right into it, we saw on your website a great question that would really kick off this power chat. What if we could predict epidemics like we predict the weather? And how is Microsoft's Premonitions helping us to do so?
Yeah, you saw the right thing on the website. That is what we post. The question we asked ourselves is, what if you can predict epidemics like you predict the weather? Um, and so this journey, really starting to answer this question, started about 6 years back, a little bit more. And it was a scientific question at that time. We wanted to understand why do we know so little about epidemics? And this is around the time when Ebola and Zika were kind of on the rise. And it was like the center of the news. Of course, now we are in a pandemic, so that changes a whole lot of things. But back then, we asked ourselves, like, how is it that we learn about Ebola um, generally after the fact, once people have gotten sick, when it has become a scare, and worse, it has caused damage to human life, economies, and kind of humanity in general. So that's where we ask the question, hey, what would it take to predict epidemics like weather? So if you look at kind of life all around us, and if you were to put that on a pyramid, humans, vertebrates in general, would be at top of the pyramid, and you have tens of thousands of those species. If you go down the pyramid, you have invertebrates, things like bees, worms, mosquitoes, arthropods, etc. in general. And those are millions of species that we know of. At the base of the pyramid is the bulk of life form, and that's microbes and viruses. And those are tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and even billions. We actually don't know. Like that's the frontier of knowledge in science. We don't know how many species there are. We're learning about new ones nearly on a daily basis. And everyone we know, everyone you love, all of humanity and other parts of the animal kingdom dearly depends on a balance with these microbes and viruses, the invisible. We don't see them, they're all around us, but they profoundly impact everything we do, not just our health, but our economies. So if you think about bees, which are in middle of the pyramid, they pollinate trillions of dollars of crop. Without bees, many parts of our economy, if not all of humanity, might fall apart. It's been predicted. Microbes, when it comes to microbes and viruses, microbes help us invent the antibiotics we take, and viruses are at the heart of pandemics like the current one that we fight. So it's critical that we learn more about these microbes and viruses and kind of what's happening in the biome, everything living around us. And unlike weather, we really don't have any sensors or a sensor network or a data stream to understand what's happening around us in the world of in this living world. So if you kind of rewind back 60, 80 years weather, really the critical change in predicting the weather or understanding the weather was development of sensors or techniques or devices to be able to better understand what Mother Nature might do, what the clouds are doing, what formations mean, using launching satellites to be able to use thermal IR and far infrared imaging to see through clouds, precipitation, etc., and to be able to predict all of that. We don't have that for our biome, and that's the goal for Microsoft Premonition. Is can we create whatever is needed, whether it's a sensor network, whether it's software, whether it's new biological technologies, can we create whatever is needed to be able to start gathering data on what's happening in the biome around us? And that's really kind of the crux of premonition. And so, how do we do that? We're coming close. So here's where we started. That it's a really big problem, but we said, okay, let's start by understanding um, what diseases or what microbes or what viruses the life forms around us are carrying. Not just humans, animals, birds, cows, whatnot. And so the first problem we embarked upon is, hey, how do we take a blood sample from all of these living things and then run them through a genome sequencer and then match them against a really large reference database to understand what's going on. So it turns out creating a sensor like that is extremely hard. But the epiphany was that, hey, Mother Nature already has a thing that goes around, bites people, bites birds, cows, and whatnot, and takes a blood sample, a mosquito. So mosquitoes themselves are a huge nuisance. They themselves cause more than 600 million clinical cases of disease every year. But on top of it, they're basically sampling blood here and there. They bite a cow, they bite a dog, birds, humans. And so what we embarked upon is, if we can capture these mosquitoes, if we can attract them to a device, we can capture them, we can then squish them up and put them through a genomic sequencer and create some software to really analyze in depth. Not only can we learn about that mosquito, where it's been, what it's landed on, and picked up microbes on its feet, but if it bit a cow, it's taken a blood sample from it. And can we look in that blood sample to understand the health of the cow, for instance? And I'm using cow as a proxy, but you could imagine if you start gathering this for millions and millions and billions of mosquitoes, you would start having a data stream that gives you a continuous snapshot, almost like a video footage of what's happening in the biome. It might still be a sliver of what we need to know to be able to predict, epidemics like weather, but it's a start. So that's where we built our first technology. It's called a premonition smart trap. Essentially, it has mechanisms to lure many different type of species, not just mosquitoes, but even subspecies within mosquitoes. It can attract them. It can, in fraction of a second, in fact, less than 4 milliseconds, it can see through its customized proprietary sensors whether it's a mosquito of a particular species that we do want to capture. It can make that decision and then basically suck that sample in. So, for instance, if a moth flies by and it's interested in our premonition trap, uh, the trap does nothing. It just sits there and nothing. It lets the moth be on its way. But if it's a mosquito or a species of interest, we can pluck it out of the environment and put it in our sample bag. Um, on its own, all of that generates massive amounts of data, because now we can start to understand what kind of species are prevalent in a particular environment. So, just to take a detour, just knowing what kind of mosquitoes are out there is extremely powerful for fighting mosquito-borne diseases. So, that's a product we're working on, because that was like a low-hanging fruit of the really big scientific vision we have. Back to the scientific vision. So we pluck the mosquito. It's in a bag now, which preserves the mosquito. It doesn't let it, dry out. Doesn't let it get damaged. It's brought back into the lab, maybe on a 48-hour basis, 72 hours. Somebody grabs that back, and we run it through a process, basically extracting the DNA code. And it goes through another piece of technology we built, which is called premonition metagenomics. And this is a cloud scale technology where we reference everything in that mosquito. So remember, that mosquito might have bitten 5 different things, and those 5 different things might have 1,000 things floating around in their bloodstream. So we can take, and that's really, really small signal. And what our cloud scale metagenomics allows us to do is take that really, really weak signal and really explode it and fully understand what's going on. So, case in point, in 2017, when we deployed this system, we found um, disease in a cow by doing this. So, mosquito bit a cow, and then we were able to figure out what diseases were in that cow. And we were able to verify that, with a direct blood sample, for instance, of the cow. Um, so those are essentially the two pieces of technology. One is the smart trap, which can go sample the environment for us and selectively so that we can tell exactly go get these kind of samples. These days we are focused on mosquitoes. And then the second technology, metagenomics, which can then extract signal out of it and start giving us a picture of what's out there. The final comment I have there is the goal here really is to unlock a new data stream for the world, just like weather satellite did for the weather world. And that led to being able to predict weather. So even 15 years back, we didn't have apps like dark sky or is it going to rain in the next 3 minutes. That didn't exist. The data streams existed, and then the technology came along with deep neural networks and AI in general, and we were able to do really interesting things with the data stream and be able to predict down to a 5-minute resolution whether it's going to rain or not. We want to do the same with our biological understanding of the world. So just like how big data unlocked business intelligence about 10, 12 years back, because we had the compute, the storage to take data about everything, we think the data streams we are unlocking will allow a new class of applications called biological intelligence. So that's a quick overview. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, no, it's extremely fascinating. I was following along here, and I loved the fact that you all found a natural solution to a problem that you had and to find a positive reason to use mosquitoes. But it really sounds like you're on the forefront of really unlocking some really incredible technology and some really incredible data sources. And so, moving on, what was the original inspiration behind Microsoft's Premonitions?
Yeah, so the original inspiration really was around the time Ebola was really taking over the world. This was, I believe, 2014 timeframe. And really, the question we asked ourselves was, how can one of these rarest viruses jump from animals to human? Like, when did it happen? Why did it happen? Now, we aren't biologists by training, so we were just curious from a scientific perspective. Um, but our backgrounds were in machine learning, sensing, and robotics, and of course, computer science on the background of all of that. And we felt like, there is something, some intersection of smarts, so AI, machine learning back then, robotics, and using the power of the cloud and computer science to possibly get at this answer. It's like, how did Ebola, one of the rarest virus, make its jump? And how is it that if for the history of humankind, for novel viruses and diseases, it's only that we find out about them once people start getting sick and they die from it, which has historically been the way and even currently is the norm. We wanted to change that. We wanted to see if we can collect some data, some insight from nature to be able to stay one step ahead or half a step ahead, even if that. So that's where kind of the original inspiration was. It started in a very different place. We were deploying drones to kind of put these traps. We did not have the idea of using a mosquito back then, but then we were like, hey, how do we sample blood? And we looked into robotics, and that's where we realized, hang on, we are trying to make a flying thing that takes a blood sample, which seems impossible. It's like a crazy robotics project in itself. That's where we were like, hey, hang on, mosquitoes already do that. Can we somehow use mosquitoes? So it was a really crazy idea back then. But like kind of now looking back, it seems obvious that, yeah, it's obvious. Mosquitoes take a sample and you can go grab mosquitoes and then squish their bellies to get the sample out.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
wasn't
no,
obvious to us back then.
yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. It certainly makes sense now, but I could see where that making that leap was kind of, a process within itself. And so, how do you see this technology and the data you're collecting? How do you envision that will help us to prevent or stay ahead of pandemics in the future?
Yeah, so that's our hope is to answer that soon in the next couple of years. So there's a couple facets to this technology that we have essentially invented and have large number of patents on. Like I mentioned in passing, one of the lowest hanging fruit that came out of this technology was some of our public health entities. Where we're going to Texas in Harris County, we're working very closely with the Harris County Public Health Division. While we were working on this, they were like, "Hey, this vision is amazing, but sounds like you're able to detect, identify mosquitoes like within fractions of a second and capture it." And they were like, "You know what? That's what we do in mosquito and vector control division. So can you modify your technology to just do the mosquito aspect of it?" And so that's what we did, and we're working with them on better mosquito intervention strategies, better understanding where disease carrying mosquitoes are, and reducing to possibly eradicating vector-borne disease when it comes to mosquitoes. How it then helps really stay a step ahead of pandemics, that will happen once we have a network of these devices deployed kind of across the planet. So if we focus just on in the US, we would deploy this all across the US. We have these data streams coming in. We're already working for the last 4 years with academics and some of the top scientists in the country to unlock what they can do once this data stream starts coming in. Um, our hope is this data stream will enable a whole new class of science, research, and technology where you'll be able to see anomalies. So, to give you one example, which we hypothesize might happen, is you have some data stream coming in, and let's say it constantly says, I see something interesting. It doesn't know what it is. It just says, I see something interesting in this remote region of California, right? And it's mostly cattle farms there. Uh, Currently, the US government and many other nations, the de facto way of understanding the environment is to literally send someone, a team of people, that randomly samples stuff in the environment. And it doesn't have to be random. They can say, we're going to focus on bats for coronavirus, which, by the way, was a program in 2019, I believe, or 2018. It was called USAID Predict. Or they might say, we're going to go sample cattle, whatever. They come up with some hypothesis. They literally physically go with a syringe, take a sample, and then run that sample. As you could imagine, you cannot scale that. It's impossible to sample the world. So coming back to premonition, how will help? So imagine it keeps telling us that there's something interesting in this remote part of California. Now what you can do, you can mobilize that sampling team and say, you know what, there's something interesting here. So you've not found the needle in the haystack, but you've pointed to the right haystack in the farm of haystacks. And now you can really focus your energy on sampling and understanding kind of what signal it is. And our hope is you would discover an anomaly or a zoonotic spillover or a rare virus making a jump from cows to humans or something on those lines. So it would massively increase the probability of finding those anomalies. And that's how we can stay a step ahead in for a future epidemic or even a pandemic.
Absolutely. I mean, I could see where just knowing where to look is just important enough and takes a team of people to do. And so we've talked a little bit about the journey, how the questions were raised, and then how you began the process, and then now a little bit about the data that you're starting to collect. But how does premonitions actually work? Can you describe a little bit about the robotics behind it?
Yeah, so it's fascinating how it works. Basically, it's the device itself. is has a really interesting set of technologies. So one aspect of it is a lure. Um, Basically, things that would attract whatever species you're trying to sample. So let's stick with mosquitoes as an example. Um, Mosquitoes are attracted to particular wavelength of light, heat, and something that's exhaling CO2. I mean, they're looking for a living, breathing thing to go and bite warm-blooded animals. So in that configuration, our trap mimics a warm-blooded animal, a human or a bird, whatever it is. It exhales CO2 like a human would. It has heat lures. So basically, it has parts of the body of the trap which are heated and just at a human body temperature. Um, and then there's a light source particularly tuned to attract mosquitoes from far away distance. Um, and a combination of those three actuated in a particular manner, activated at a particular time of day, knowing how some of these mosquito species behave, we can kind of attract those mosquitoes or species of interest. So that's part one of how it works is it has a programmable dynamic luring system. And you can change it to lure Aedes aegypti, or you can change it slightly to attract Culex species mosquitoes. The second aspect is now that you've lured the mosquito close and they're trying to kind of probe and see what this thing is, how do I bite this thing? Because it looks like a human, but I can't get through this. When they're probing, we want to very quickly know whether we've attracted a mosquito or whether we ended up attracting a moth or one of the other millions of flying things in the environment. For that, we have a really sophisticated optical sensor, which is, in its simplest term, it is like an IR curtain. You know, if you've been to a mall and kind of put your hand under a hand dryer, air dryer, it turns on, and it's using somewhat the same physics and technology, except that in our trap, it's a lot more sophisticated, and it is different and very optically precise. So basically, there's a curtain of light. When a mosquito flies through it, it is reflecting light off back in that curtain of light, and the reflections and the pattern in that reflection depends on how they're flapping their wings. So that was the other part of discovery that we made, as on part of this journey, is that different species of mosquitoes and different species of arthropods have a unique wing beat frequency. In other words, how they flap their wings is kind of unique to a particular family of species. So, by looking at the reflection of light from their wings and mapping that and then gathering that, we can quickly run that signature of light through a machine learning algorithm. And all of this happens in about 4 milliseconds. And that lets us estimate that, yeah, that's an Aedes aegypti style mosquito. We want it. Once that estimation is made, the third part of the trap comes in. The third part of the trap is that the openings on the trap are by default closed. They're kind of like a door. Once the machine learning says, yes, that's a sample of Aedes aegypti, and I've been programmed to capture it, it opens that trap door and turns on what I would, in its simplest term, explain as a sophisticated vacuum cleaner. So basically, it quickly sucks that one mosquito in. And we have four of these trapdoors and four of these sensors. So we only open the one that's where the mosquito was. And once it's sucked in, it goes into a data collection, not excuse me, sample collection cavity, which is just a bag really, but it's designed so that there's a positive air pressure at all times, so mosquitoes don't fly out next time you open the door. And second, there's no kind of wind currents in that bag. We don't want to constantly swirl around the samples, otherwise they're gonna die, their wings might break, and it gets very difficult to deal with them. So there's a positive air pressure which keeps the samples more or less intact in that bag. And now all of this device is has an IoT connection back to the cloud. So we are seeing all of these analytics in real time. So even if you're not interested in gathering that sample physically, and let's say you're Harris County Public Health, you now know where are the hotspots for Aedes aegypti that carry dengue disease. And now you can really target your, spraying interventions, or whatever interventions that department takes, to really those hotspots, instead of spraying everywhere and hoping all mosquitoes die. So that's in a nutshell kind of some pieces of the trap technology. There's a lot more. There's a lot of compute, there's a lot of cloud connection, IoT stuff, but those are just details.
It's fascinating to hear how you're really at the crossroads of biology and advanced technology here. And I could see at its most basic, simplest form how this could be applicable to backyard barbecues. But could you
Yeah.
tell us some other applications of this technology?
Yeah, so the backyard barbecue type device is really interesting thought you have. Um, when it comes to kind of mosquito, you can imagine once we really productize this technology and we bring the cost down, it kind of becomes like citizen science weather stations. You can go to Costco and you can buy this lacrosse weather station that's actually internet connected, and it works with, I believe, weather.com. There's purple air for air quality, and you could absolutely see this happening, where you have a little device in your backyard. Maybe the pest control company installed it for you, and now you have an app that says, no mosquitoes in your backyard or anywhere. And if that goes up, automatically pest control comes in and kind of takes care of, disease carrying mosquitoes in your backyard. So that's absolutely possible, and it's just not been a priority for us right now. But we have the technology, we know how to make it. We have the mechanical engineers, the scientists, the computer scientists, to make a version that goes in your backyard. Some of the other applications, it is not just limited to mosquito-borne disease, which is kind of one application we're focusing on. Global health in general uh, is a really, really large effort. And the current state of global health for a lot of programs like malaria, dengue, etc., or LF in for tropical diseases, is you pump a lot of money and assets and resources into these programs. But generally, there's the only way to measure success is to wait and see if people get sick, right? And so, with kind of biological intelligence, what we want to unlock is also a quicker feedback loop. So, when you spend money, resources, or you take a novel action, you can very quickly, in the matter of days to weeks, kind of learn if that was effective or not. If not, you can go back, do something different. Right now, we wait for a whole season cycle, see what the clinical cases were, how many deaths, how many people got sick. And it would be awesome if we can help so that you don't have to wait for people to get sick. You're actually ideating and changing and iterating on your ideas a lot faster. So that's another application. National security is, of course, biothreats, man-made or otherwise. We talked about natural biothreats like epidemics, but biothreat and national security. Another one is in tourism. If you are a hotel owner, property manager, etc., you don't want your guests to get sick. You want to stay on top of kind of what's happening on your property from kind of a biological perspective. And that's been made super evident in our current pandemic, right? Like you stay at properties where you can kind of see three check marks that says extra care taken in sanitizing, etc., because people want to stay safe if they're on a vacation. Um, so if you're managing a large property, biological intelligence plays a huge role, and we think we can unlock that. You can take proactive action, or just even know what is the health of the biome for the property you manage. So there's a whole slew of those applications. The backyard one you mentioned is super interesting, because you can imagine, 5 years from now, you open an app And just like you're checking on the weather, it actually tells you to avoid a particular block in the city or not to go in a particular neighborhood or something because the risk of getting a certain disease is much higher. So imagine you could do that. Imagine you could protect yourself and you had this superpower in the palm of your hands where you just kind of knew what to avoid. And if you really take it, apply a little science fiction lens to it, you could imagine one day humanity would have technology where, just to kind of put a picture in your head, imagine you had some kind of AR goggles and you can see every disease. So just like you avoid obstacles, just like you avoid puddles, you can avoid communicable disease. So imagine what it would mean to have no communicable diseases. You just don't get sick from communicable diseases. That's really far out, but you can imagine this is like a step, like a really baby step in that journey.
Yeah, and even though it may sound like science fiction, it's fascinating to know that you're working on some of the technology that really might be the building blocks of that someday. Backyard barbecues, as simple as it sounds, may take a backseat to national security, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, in very important applications and multiple applications that could happen with the technology that you're working on at Microsoft. So, as you know, we talk a lot about the Sustainable Development Goals at IdeaGen. It's kind of our backdrop for our summits and our
Yeah.
conversations. And so, how can this help with the global health agenda, which is very much intertwined with the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, this cross cuts, I would say, all of the sustainable development goals if you really take a step back, everything from smart cities, from kind of new technologies that will spin up new industries, new science, but particularly for the global health agenda within SDG. uh, we're already applying it to some of the scenarios for malaria, and majority of the burden of malaria is on the shoulders of really young kids, like under the age of 2, in Africa, in India, Southeast Asia in general, and just unfortunately, a lot of kids die from malaria, and that's preventable with this technology. And I feel like we can absolutely make a dent there. Uh, we can improve the kind of the surveillance on where these malaria carrying mosquitoes are. We can help agencies and folks on the ground take the right action, spray the right product, and then 24 hours later tell them whether it worked or not. So if you sprayed a product but the malaria carrying mosquitoes are not dead, we can tell that, we can give that information to global health kind of units trying to fight malaria in like 24 to 30 hours so that they can, redeploy some of their other assets. So it has a massive impact on global health. And I'm just talking about malaria, but you can kind of extrapolate that to many other diseases.
Absolutely. I mean, I could certainly see the applications across, as you said, almost all of the SDGs themselves, which is incredible. That one piece of work or technology, a group of individuals can really affect that many of the goals and that many people around the world. And so, even though we've talked a lot about technology that I may not quite understand, I would love to be able to see it in action. So, do you give tours to your biocontainment facility?
Yeah, we do. Sometimes it's not a theme park. We cannot have a lot of visitors, but we absolutely love, bringing folks in, walking them through the work we do. And you mentioned biocontainment facility, which I only briefly touched upon, but on its own, it's a massive innovation project. Just to mention one in passing, and we'll see if we can flash some pictures here. The biocontainment facility is built to mimic the environment, that is, the light, humidity, temperature, pressure of any point on Earth at any time. So, given a 4D coordinate, which is X, Y, Z in space and time, we can mimic the environment anywhere. And we do this, for example, when we bring in samples from, let's say, Texas, we'll say, okay, dial this biocontainment facility to 4th of May 2019, and it's going to simulate the solar cycle, the temperature, the humidity, the pressure, so that the mosquitoes feel like they're still in Texas and they behave exactly like they would in Texas, except they're up here in Washington and it's probably raining outside and it's cold, but they behave like they're in Texas, and we can now gather all of the data needed to train our machine learning classifiers. So yeah, absolutely, we do give tours and would love to, give a tour to the IdeaGen family next time you're up here in Redmond, Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is incredible that you can have that, sensitive of an environment controlled indoors. And I understand why it wouldn't be seen as a theme park, but that's absolutely incredible, and I
For
look
us, it's
forward
a
to
theme park. We still feel like kids when we are in there.
that.
The
Sure,
only reason I mentioned we cannot bring in a lot of people is it's a biocontainment facility, and protecting some of those disease-carrying vectors, or rather protecting us from them, is paramount. And so safety is a
absolutely.
paramount concern here.
Absolutely, and as it should be. And so as we, kind of begin to close up this power chat, you've talked a little bit about it, but can you share with our global audience, what's the big picture, and how will this look or work on more of a global scale around the world?
Yeah, so on a global scale, we see this as a sensor network that's essentially gathering data about the biome all across the planet. And when you take that data in its entirety, you can ask some really interesting questions. Like I said, kind of what's happening, where are the anomalies, why is this happening, is could this be a new virus that might threaten another pandemic, etc. And that's one aspect of it. You could also ask very business centric questions, such as you can predict if there will be an outbreak of dengue, and you could take, logistical actions against it. You can set up supply chains to counteract it, etc. If you are a logistics company, you do want to know when you send your people across the world, when your drivers are delivering packages or whatnot, are they staying safe? If you are the military, you're deploying troops, you don't want your troops to get sick from malaria or dengue and come down with a virus that you could have prevented. um, so a whole lot of applications. And like I said, if you really fast forward, I don't know how many years, and apply the science fiction lens, I think we can eradicate communicable diseases. They will cease to exist with sophisticated technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been blown away by just the conversation today, but I look forward to being able to, as you said, almost open an app on your phone, be able to check the weather, where not to go due to certain conditions, and have it see, powered by Microsoft's Premonitions at the bottom there.
Right.
I think that would be absolutely
Soon.
incredible, for that technology. But you're right, there's just there's limitless applications to it. Creating that data stream, that data set, the same way that we do with the weather, but now, with the biome of the Earth. So, Dr. Sidhant Gupta, Director of Product Incubation at Microsoft, one, I thank you for the work that you're doing because it's truly incredible. And two, thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you, John.
Thank you.
All right.